Today we are talking with Professor Mohammad Marandi, an expert on American studies. He teaches at the University of Tehran. We're going to be talking about the recent developments in the U.S.-Israeli war against the people of Iran, the latest developments. Mohammed, welcome back to the Socialist Program.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure being on your show, and I've been on your show for quite a long time now.
You are one of our favorite guests, and we've seen you in other media outlets recently, and we think it's important because the people in the United States and the people in Europe, but especially in the United States, the source of this aggression, along with the Israelis, they don't get to hear the Iranian people. They don't get to hear the Iranian perspective. They're spoon-fed this propaganda, these war talking points, as if it's the news, when in fact it is propaganda. So we're very, very happy to have you. I'm looking at the New York Times right now, Mohammed. Uncertainty in Strait, meaning Strait of Hormuz, escalates as U.S. and Iran trade threats. Second headline, oil jumps as Iran resists Trump's offer to help ships through Strait of Hormuz. I like the way they couch it as an offer. Anyway, the Wall Street Journal at the same time says Trump is going for it. He's going to, quote, escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz regardless, no matter what Iran says. Anyway, with all of that sort of threat of escalation, and at the same time, there's been lots of negotiations. You were in Islamabad for where some of the talks took place. Where are we right now? Where is the Trump administration? Where is the Zionist Israeli regime? And what do you expect in the coming days?
Here they're expecting a major attack on Iran, and the United States has gathered forces in the Emirates, in Kuwait, in Bahrain in particular, but of course, logistically, Saudi Arabia is key, and also Qatar is being used probably to a lesser degree, but still. And then there's Jordan. The Israeli regime is preparing. So we're expecting an imminent assault, and it will probably include a land assault on uh, islands, but also on Iranian uh, land on the mainland. So the Iranians are, from my understanding, currently carrying out limited strikes on the Emirates to make it more difficult for this assault to take place, but also to punish the Emirates for the role that they're playing in this imminent assault. The Emirates is probably doing the most against Iran, as it has been doing for many years. The Iranians have really forgiven these countries too many times. And, as you know this very well, in 1980, when Saddam Hussein, at the behest, with the encouragement of the United States, invaded Iran, it was at a time when it was just after the revolution. It was chaos. Government institutions were still completely disorganized. The army was in disarray. There was no real revolutionary guards or anything like that. A few young men with a few guns here and there. And then the United States thought it would be a good time to wreck the revolution, bring it down, and so they pushed Saddam Hussein uh, to attack. And these countries in the Persian Gulf, especially at that time, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, they gave hundreds of billions of dollars to destroy Iran, and they helped fund his chemical weapons program, which of course Germany played a very key role, and the United States played a role, as well as with their biological program, which was not finished when the war ended, as far as I know. But then, of course, after Saddam Hussein went and invaded Kuwait and threatened his former allies, Iran forgave these regimes, and the relationship normalized until the United States decided to destroy Libya and Syria during the Arab Spring. And these regimes, these despots, in order to prevent the Arab Spring from spreading, they used ISIS and Al Qaeda at the behest of the United States. And they, along with Turkey and Jordan, and of course the Israeli regime, they helped support ISIS and Al Qaeda to undermine the Syrian government and brought about so much destruction in Syria and Iraq. And now, of course, Syria is controlled by uh, ISIS and Al Qaeda proxies, which are assisting the Israeli regime because they're trying to blockade Lebanon and prevent the resistance in Lebanon from getting support so they can fight the Israeli regime. And then, of course, in this new wave, the 12-day war that the United States and the Netanyahu regime carried out, U.S. Bases in the Persian Gulf were being used to assist the Israeli regime both defensively and offensively, and for the U.S. strike as well. And of course, these bases were used against Yemen during their genocidal war, their Western-backed genocidal war. They were used against Syria. They were used against Iraq. So now the United States, after the 39-day assault, which these countries were key, without these five regimes and plus Jordan, the war could not have happened. It just was not logistically possible for Trump and of course Netanyahu by extension. And since the ceasefire, we see a huge buildup of U.S. Assets in these countries, including a lot of weapon systems for a ground invasion, which, as I said, Iran believes to be imminent. So we are where we are. Iran has also been preparing. And I think that if a war begins, Ryan, I think you're going to see a global economic depression is almost assured.
Well, I can tell you, Mohammed, that in the United States, even though the stock market is doing quite well, basically booming, actually, 90% of the people in the United States don't own stocks. But they do have cars and they have car loans and they have to fill their cars up with gasoline to get to work. There's a huge foreclosure going on car loans, which is the last thing people don't pay, because if you can't pay your car loan, you can't get to work and your whole life, unravels. Huge part of the population is really suffering economically in this, the richest country in the world. And if there is an escalation, as you are suggesting the Iranians are preparing for, that is going to, as you're also suggesting, the economic impact is going to be, so big on people who have nothing to do with the war. And a lot of Americans are thinking, like, why are we doing this? And a lot of Americans think we're doing it because of Israel, or a lot of Americans think U.S. foreign policy is controlled by ExxonMobil. I mean, working class people have no investments in the Middle East. No worker has one investment in the Middle East or anywhere overseas. So a lot of people are thinking, yeah, this is a rich man's war, another rich man's war for the sake of Wall Street and corporate America. If what you are saying is turns out to be accurate, and of course we hope it's not. We hope there's not a ground invasion. We hope there's like going back to the negotiating table and talking to the Iranians in earnest, in good faith. But if that were to happen, this will be something that will change the whole picture politically and economically everywhere. I mean, this could be like a real turning point if we think back just big picture to the past, I don't know, 80 years since the end of World War II. Go ahead.
You're absolutely correct. I hope that Iran strikes against the Emirates and against the ships affiliated to these regimes, forces them to rethink and to put pressure on the United States to bring an end to this. But I'm not very optimistic. These are proxies of the United States. And as you saw, when Joe Kent resigned in his resignation letter, he said that this war is about the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime. I mean, he was the head of counterterrorism. He was put in place. He was installed by Trump himself. And so it's clear that after 2 months and a week or so, that nothing really has changed to make us think that it's not Zionism and the Israeli regime that are pushing for this war to restart. Of course, the war has been continuing through the siege and through the Israeli slaughter in Lebanon, but the hot war that the United States is about to initiate or is planning to initiate or seems to be planning to initiate shortly, uh, this is something that I don't think that these regimes are going to push back against, especially the Emirates. I think the Emirates are 100% for it. I think some of the others are, like Kuwait, perhaps, and Qatar, are more cautious. But but in any case, we're very close to a very uh, decisive moment. Already, as it is, the global economic situation is going to get very bad. And even if somehow magically the conflict ended tonight, the global economic situation is going to get very bad because what we're seeing right now, the high prices with gasoline and foods, this is basically just a symptom. What is about to happen is that many of the supply chains are going to start to collapse and factories are going to shut down. And of course, the price of energy is going to go much higher. And the real price of oil, now LNG aside, natural gas aside, the real price of oil on the spot market is significantly higher than what is being announced on CNN. The paper market is totally detached from reality. And I'm not optimistic about the prospects for the global economy. And yet Trump, whether he's deeply compromised or he's bought off or it's a combination of different things, it seems he is hell-bent on doing what Netanyahu wants him to do.
Let's just talk about what a possible deal might look like. Trump the other night, one day he issues, these sort of existential threats against Iran. Then the next day he says, well, we're really having great talks with Iran and, we're about to have a deal. So you can't tell from Trump what he says from not one day to the next, 1 hour to the next. I mean, it's really off the charts. So I'm sure Iran and everyone knows this and doesn't take any of it that seriously. But, he basically said, we're close to a deal. Well, I want to ask you, because if you're talking as you are on this show to mainly an American audience, what does Iran want? What would a deal look like? And there was the 15-point program that the U.S. brought to Islamabad, and then the Iranians had a 10-point program. There's been all sorts of different iterations of negotiated possibilities. All wars have a beginning, and most wars, not say the war in Korea, but most wars have an end, and the end can come about through different possibilities. Now, Trump thought the Iranians would sue for peace immediately after the war started, that it would be a repeat of like the June 12th scenario or the June war, the 12-day war. That didn't happen. The Iranians decided this is existential. We're going to fight. We're going to really make the aggressor pay a price here, and that's what's happened. So all of his calculations have been wrong so far. But again, people in the United States won't know what would a settlement from Iran's point of view look like. What are some of the key elements?
I think if anyone, well, first of all, just like during the 12-day war, at the beginning of the Ramadan war, the 39-day war, which continued after the ceasefire because the siege on Iranian ports is an act of war. But just like at the beginning of the 12-day war, at the beginning of this war, Trump demanded unconditional surrender. And then after a few days, when he saw that this is not working, he started sending messages to Iran, and Iran ignored them, all of them, until day 30 something, almost like a month, over a month after the war started. The Americans sent a 15-point plan, which Iran rejected. And it said that this violates our constitution and we're not taking this seriously. A couple of days later, Iran, a few days later, sent their own 10-point plan, and Trump, in his desperation to get a ceasefire, he accepted it as the framework for negotiation. Iran accepted to halt the fighting in order to have this discussed. Now, Many may say, well, Iran shouldn't have believed Trump. Iran knew he was lying, but Iran thought that this was symbolic, that this was a defeat for Trump when he accepted Iran's 10-point plan as the basis for discussions. But also, Iran needed to rearm and prepare itself for the next phase as well, just like the United States. It's not as if the United States is the only side that's going to prepare itself. We saw after the 12-day war, Iran accepted a ceasefire, and many criticized Iran, said you should have continued. But the reality was that Iran saw that they, even though they won that war, but they saw they had many shortcomings, and those shortcomings were exposed to the Iranians during that 12 days, and those 12 days, and they restructured their military and uh, restructured a lot of elements within civil society, and we saw how well they performed during the 39 days of U.S. aggression. So when the talks happened, the 10-point Iranian plan is very reasonable. Anyone who looks it up uh, will not see anything strange in it. Iran wants its sovereignty respected. Iran wants its friends across the region to be safe. Iran wants reparations for a war of aggression. Uh, these are issues that any normal country would expect, but for the empire, this is all outrageous. And for Western media and the empire and the West, which sees itself as supreme, they see themselves as exceptional and above the rest of the world, they can't comprehend that a country that is, not a part of the empire. Of course, nowadays the United States respects no one, not even their allies. They want Greenland, but or parts of Canada, or all of Canada. Who knows what they'll want tomorrow? But the point is that the 10-point plan by Iran is seen as unacceptable and unreasonable simply because they do not consider this, Iran or any other country to be equal, to be to have equal rights as the United States, as a nation. So we are where we are. At the negotiations, of course, well, we had a ceasefire before the negotiations, and Netanyahu tried to wreck it. Iran was going to allow more ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, ships that belong to, the Strait of Hormuz was never closed. Only ships affiliated to those 5 Arab family dictatorships that have been helping kill Iranians, meaning the Saudis, Qatar, the Emirates, Kuwait, and Bahrain, only their ships were restricted. So Iran was supposed to allow more ships to go through if there was a ceasefire across the region. Netanyahu wrecked that ceasefire by carpet bombing cities in Lebanon, slaughtering many hundreds of Lebanese citizens literally in minutes, just to wreck the ceasefire. And that he did. He succeeded in that. Iran said that we're not going to allow ships to go through until Netanyahu accepts the ceasefire. And then when he ultimately did, for a couple day or two, Iran said, okay, we'll allow those ships to go. But then the Americans Trump said we're going to enforce this embargo on Iranian ports. And Iran said, well, that's a violation of the ceasefire. That's an act of war. So we're not going to allow those extra ships to go through. So basically, Netanyahu and Trump have for over 2 months been starving the world of oil, of LNG, of petrochemicals, of natural gas,
Helium.
of everything, of
Yeah.
helium, of course, yeah, and fertilizers and many other things. Any petrochemical that is produced. So they've been starving the world for, even their own friends, even, the Israelis, which pretend to have good relations with India. India's in bad shape. The Europeans, all those regimes that have been supporting the genocide in Gaza, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the British, the EU, India, the government in India at least, none of them have been spared by the Israeli regime and Trump, who are wrecking the global economy just to justify this war of aggression against the Iranian people.
I'm wondering what Iran, some of the demands, you see this in the American media, and I'm only raising it because I want you to be able to respond so that people in the United States hear an Iranian response, not because we're embracing any of it. But, Iran is a member of the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It has the right to develop a civilian nuclear energy program. In fact, the U.S., and as you've talked about on other interviews, it was the U.S. itself that built these nuclear facilities in Iran as long as a U.S. puppet government, the Shah, was the leader of Iran. That was in the 1950s and the 1960s. And then when the Iranian people had their own revolution and reclaimed sovereignty for Iran, the U.S. said, "Oh, you're the number one enemy in the world and you can't have nuclear energy." Well, the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is a quid pro quo. Non-nuclear weapon possessing nations have the right to civilian nuclear energy programs. And in return, the countries that have nuclear weapons are supposed to step by step get rid of those weapons. They're supposed to be gone after a certain amount of time. That's the quid pro quo for non-proliferation. So Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons. It says it doesn't want them. It says it's evil to have weapons of mass destruction. But it does have the right to enrich uranium. And now the U.S. says, well, we have to either take control of the uranium stockpiles, or Iran, as Trump said, has to agree not to enrich any uranium for the next 20 years. This is obviously a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which the U.S. is a signatory to, meaning the Senate ratified it, meaning in American constitutional law, that treaty is the highest law of the land. That's the way a treaty is understood in American jurisprudence. And yet, these are the demands on Iran. What will Iran do, or what is it saying it's willing to do? Obviously, it made agreements with the JCPOA under Obama in 2015. What's Iran's position now?
I don't want to go in detail over the nuclear program, but I think there are a couple of good books if people are interested to go and read. One is a slight book, a small book by Peter Oborn on the nuclear program. I think it's called The Dangerous Delusion. I'm not sure, but I think it's very much worth reading. And
Okay.
another one is by Gareth Porter. I think it's called Manufactured Crisis. Both explain the history of the nuclear program and how all the nonsense that they've been saying about Iran from the very beginning is just were just excuses in order to corner Iran, in order to marginalize Iran, in order to isolate Iran, in order to sanction Iran, because Iran is independent and because Iran supports liberation causes across the world. They support the Cubans, they support the Venezuelans, they support Palestine, they supported the resistance and against apartheid South Africa, but Palestine being, of course, the key issue today. That is their sin. That is their sin. There is really nothing else. So I would advise people to look at Peter Oborn's book and also Gareth Porter's book. Yes, the United States under Trump and of course under previous presidents had tried very hard to take away Iran's sovereign rights to enrich uranium. That program, as you rightly pointed out, began during the Shah. A lot of money was spent. Many people were trained, and the Iranians were saying it's our sovereign right, and we're going to continue with this. And Iran is not going to accept U.S. demands, and it went to war. I mean, a war of defense. The United States and the Israeli regime carried out 2 wars against Iran in the last year, and of course 3 wars if you include 1980, where near the end the United States got directly involved and started attacking Iran militarily, in alongside its ally Saddam Hussein. At that time, Saddam was their ally. When he was actually using chemical weapons, he was their ally. But Iran won't accept that. Iran is willing to accept. I mean, if you just look at, forget Gareth Porter and Peter Oborn. If you just look at, the IAEA reports, the International Atomic Energy Agency reports, there's no evidence whatsoever that Iran was ever pursuing a nuclear weapon. And they had intrusive inspections in Iran for years, the most intrusive in the entire world, by far. And then you had US intelligence agencies repeatedly say that since 2003, Iran has not been pursuing a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran wasn't pursuing one before 2003 either. But in any case, they admit that since 2003, Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon. The Joe Kent, who just resigned, he said that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon in his resignation letter. He's a Trump appointee, and of course, uh, you know, Trump basically ignored ignores his intelligence and instead obeys uh, Netanyahu or follows the Netanyahu narrative. Whereas while Tulsi Gabbard just last year under oath said Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons, Trump said that what she's saying is nonsense, and he just pursues the Netanyahu narrative. What is the Netanyahu narrative? For 32 years, Netanyahu has been saying Iran is 1 or 2 years away from a nuclear weapon, a few months away from a nuclear weapon, a few weeks away from a nuclear weapon. 32 years, and people have documented this, and I'm sure many of your viewers, because they're politically aware, have seen clips where they put these together, montage of all the nonsense that Netanyahu has been saying over the decades. So Trump knows that this is nonsense, but of course Trump is, he is, for whatever reason, compromised or heavily influenced because of the money or combination of all these things. This is the direction that he wants to take, and the world is suffering as a result. Alongside these two books that I mentioned, and because I know your audience is they're politically informed. There are two other books I would advise people to read. One, To Understand Iran Better, it's a somewhat old book, but by Alistair Crook, which I think people nowadays know more of because he is online more often, called Resistance. And I think it's a good book for people to read. And another one is a book that I know you know of called Going to Tehran by Flint and Hilary Mann Leverett, which tells about it talks about all the narratives that have been produced by Western media and think tanks and Western elites, U.S. elites against Iran. They deal with those and discredit them. They expose them, but also they tell a story that if what they say is basically that if the United States doesn't move towards rapprochement, we're going to move towards conflict. And they were in government. They worked in the White House, and they were antagonized, they were demonized, they were marginalized for writing this book. But if people had listened to them, we wouldn't be where we are today. But instead of listening to the Zionists, the policymakers, and the think tankers, and the people of influence, if they had listened to them instead of the Zionists, the world wouldn't be in crisis today. So right now, we are at a point where the United States is on the verge of launching a major assault on Iran. And Iran will have no option but to retaliate. And so if Iran's key infrastructure is destroyed, Iran will have no option but to destroy key infrastructure in occupied Palestine, but also in these regimes in the Persian Gulf. And we're approaching summer, and the Arabian Peninsula is going to become hot and humid. And if Iran is forced to strike their critical infrastructure, then these people will have to leave because it's just too hot and humid for people to tolerate. And it'll be like that for 5-6 months. So these regimes will effectively collapse. And then if Iran destroys their oil and gas infrastructure, as they've done a lot of damage to them in the previous war in retaliation, because Iran did not start the war, and at no point did Iran initiate escalation. But if Iran is forced to do so, then even if there is an agreement, even if there is an agreement, there won't be any more oil or gas, and thus we will have a global economic depression significantly worse than the 1930s, because the population on this planet is so much bigger, and already better than I that the global economy is in very bad shape anyway. So we're in a very, very dangerous situation, but it's clear that the Zionist regime, the Zionist lobby, they don't care about the Indians or the Brazilians or the Ugandans or Argentina or anything like that. They don't care about the United States. They are doing all of this for the Israeli regime.
Yeah. Mohammed, in the last 5 minutes or so, I wanted to just touch on one or two other quick topics. They're big topics, so maybe it would take more than 5 minutes, whatever it takes. But you wrote an article, a recent commentary called Iran Challenges U.S. Power, looking beyond the immediate conflict. And you were sort of suggesting at what point does this war, a war waged by the U.S. and Israel against a country of 90 million people, a big country, not a small country, and a country with a formidable military, educated population. You suggested that this could be something of a turning point or remembered. I mean, we never know where we are in the historical continuum until later. Like, we don't know. And we can't be pretending we have a crystal ball. But you can see trajectories and developments. And you postulate that this could become a genuine turning point in sort of a post unipolar power transition in the world. Now, and just for our audience that might not know what unipolar power means, it means that after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc and the socialist governments in the world together combined, constituted two-fifths of the world's population in 1970. It wasn't a small part of the planet. And after the collapse, there was a unipolar power, one world superpower, and then it used economic sanctions, invasions, you name it, every kind of aggression to sort of get its way everywhere and to topple governments that essentially owed their existence to the post-colonial project after World War II. So this era that's been dominant in world politics, you're suggesting might be coming to an end, and Iran might be, in fact, the tipping point. And I have to say, when I read that, and again, we don't have a crystal ball, but I felt like, yes, if there's any single event in recent time, this one seems to be something like that. And we don't even know where we're going. Because as you're suggesting, if the US has enough hubris and arrogance to actually escalate rather than get back to the negotiating table and negotiate in good faith and avoid what's coming, if they actually go through with this under this self-deluded narcissist Trump and his team and the military industrial complex and Netanyahu, whatever the driving forces are, they might do it in spite of the fact that it's completely idiotic. Anyway, when you think about big picture and knowing that we don't have a crystal ball, let's just draw that out a little bit because I think people need to understand the gravity of the moment for the world. And of course, even the fortunes of U.S. empire. Like, I would think more policymakers, even for the purpose of empire's strategic interests, would exercise restraint right now on Trump and on this, gallop towards escalation when the stakes are so high. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, although there's no doubt that a lot of damage has been done to the Iranian people. I mean, after all, the United States and Israelis have bombed schools, they bombed hospitals, they bombed bridges, they bombed pharmaceutical factories, they bombed the steel industry in the country. They bombed many apartment blocks. In order to kill a person, they target the family, they target the neighbors. The damage is huge, and of course, the blockade is makes it even more difficult. Even though some may say that the blockade is not as nearly as effective as they say, but still, it makes it much more difficult. And of course, if the United States does go through with this escalation, this new wave of attacks, which is madness, but if it does, it's going to get worse. But ultimately, for Iran, this is a war of an existential war. It is a war for survival. And the Iranian people are very resilient people. Uh, they are deeply influenced by the culture of Ashura, of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, how he was steadfast in support of the oppressed against the despot of his time, the role that his sister played, the heroic role of this brother and sister and his companions who are all martyred. This is something very big in Iranian culture and in the culture of the entire axis of resistance. And there's a unique resilience among the Iranian people and the people of the Axis, which, again, if one goes to Alistair Crook's book, I think people could better
Yeah.
understand. But But the point is that Iran will persevere. And we saw during the 39-day war and the 12-day war that it went completely against expectations. I mean, we knew that Iran would win this war. When they murdered the kids, and there was an intentional slaughter, which we can discuss later. But these were the first targets. And in any major operation, I've been in war. In any major operation, the first wave of attacks, those targets are very well vetted for weeks and months. That school was a known entity. It was on all the apps, American and Iranian. It was on all the maps. So, but many of the kids were the children of officers, and the Americans wanted to teach the Iranian military lesson by taking out their kids. And of course, for the Epstein class, it makes a lot of sense after what they've done to American little girls. But so when they murdered the leader, for we did even though we didn't have a leader for a week because they had to be careful not to gather the council that chooses a new leader in one place with in a way in which the American regime or the Israeli regime would figure out because they'd bombed them. So for a week we had a leadership council in accordance with the Constitution, but not a leader. But we had no run on banks. We had no um, um, queues in gas stations, lines at gas stations. We had no people rushing to supermarkets to take bread and food and so on. The armed forces function normally. People every night were on the streets, and they continue to be on the streets every night to keep security. And the Iranians persevered. And so, if the Americans escalate again, they're not going to succeed. They're only going to make the global economic situation much worse. Ultimately, the damage that Trump will do to him, to his own country, and to the people across the world will be much greater than what it does to Iran. Because a global depression, it may not, bombs may not fall on factories, but when those factories are no longer working, then they're worthless. And this will last for a very long time. So this is a war of choice for the United States. And it's not going to end well because it is going to cause, and you would know better, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is going to cause big problems inside the United States if there is a depression or even if it's just a severe recession. If there's war and it plays out the way I think it will play out, there will definitely be a depression. But let's say it's just a severe recession. The implications for the United States will be severe, but also across the world. People will turn against the United States, governments will turn against the United States and against the Israeli regime. And no one should think that the Israeli regime benefits from this. For 2.5 years, they've been carrying out genocide in Gaza and now in Lebanon. The world is watching. The world has come to despise the regime. I've been a team of Indian journalists are visiting Iran right now. I had a meeting with them today, and they were saying that the mood in India has changed. And so the world has turned against the regime, and now the world is going to suffer because of Zionism, because the world is saying this war was a meaningless war caused by Netanyahu and Trump and the Zionists. So the world is going to blame the United States and, of course, the Israeli regime for all this. Is this going to benefit the United States, the people of the United States, or the Israeli regime in the long term? Definitely not, in my opinion, at least. So,
All right.
but Iran, because of this war, and just one final point, because
Yeah.
of this war, Iran has decided to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. And that is a game changer. Iran had no intention of doing this. Before the war, they had absolutely no intention. It was business as usual. Ships were coming and going for years, But now, because of what the United States did in these regimes, Iran says we're going to take control. Not only are we going to take control, but we're going to get a fee for each ship that goes through for reparations. This is going to change everything in the Persian Gulf region. And this is the result of the stupidity of Trump and Netanyahu.
Yeah, I really hear you on this. I want to just play one last clip. It's a clip. It's Trump talking about kind of bragging that the Americans are now a pirate nation. I'm sure you've seen it. Um,
Yes.
but I'm just thinking about what you just said, Mohammed, and I want to end on this. I'll play the clip and then get you to have a quick response. But you know, 200 years ago, public opinion in what we now call global South countries might not have made a big difference because they were just the targets and subjects of imperialism and colonialism. But now world public opinion actually matters. And you can see that everywhere, especially for the Palestinians. You know, the way the world has turned against the Israeli narrative, including in the United States, including with young people of all religions, all ethnicities, including the majority
Young
of young
Jews, young
young
Jews,
Jewish people.
young Jews.
Yes. Yeah, so this public opinion actually matters now. And it's not just a matter of people in boardrooms or people with their, a finger on the trigger of big weapons. Public opinion actually matters. This what's called soft power, maybe, but let's just call it public opinion. And I think the Americans have ruined, the Trump administration has ruined an already partly very damaged American reputation. And the Israeli reputation is in the garbage. Anyway, I want to play this clip for our audience in case for some people might not have seen it. Then I'm going to give you the last word. Here's Donald Trump bragging about the fact that the U.S. government is now a pirate nation. Let's watch. It's 30 seconds.
Turn your ship around. Evacuate your engine room immediately. And you see all these guys running out of there. Now, they're 5 miles away, and one shot into the engine room blew up the engine room. The ship stopped. They used tugboats, and then we landed on top of it. On top of everything else, we then land on top of it, and we took over the ship. We took over the cargo, took over the oil. It's a very profitable business. Who would have thought we were doing that? We're like pirates. We're sort of like pirates.
Okay, that's gross, disgusting. But, again, world public opinion matters. This is the president of the United States in league with Netanyahu talking like that. And his acolytes are there laughing and clapping. Anyway, with that said, Mohammed, you get the last word.
Well, just one, and I don't know if I'm saying the word correctly. There was a large number of containers on that ship were medicine that a lot of it had to do with dialysis. Is that what you say? How do you pronounce it in English?
Yeah, dialysis.
And yeah, now there's a big shortage because the Americans have stolen it. And so this was a ship that had containers for ordinary Iranians. And for the United States to openly state that its soldiers are pirates, for people to laugh about it and clap about it. And of course, people will die as a result. Parents will die and leave their children as orphans. But of course, that doesn't matter to the Epstein class because that's what they're doing every day in Gaza. Every day in Gaza, they're slaughtering adults and children and maiming kids for life. And they're now doing the same in Lebanon. And Western journalists look away. They look in the other direction, or they pretend that these are Hezbollah strongholds to help justify the genocide because they're foot soldiers of the genocide. In Gaza, they pretended that since we aren't there, we can't confirm anything. In Lebanon, they can, but they don't. They don't tell the truth. When they're carpet bombing, I spoke to 2 Western journalists in Beirut. Both contacted me to get like sound bites or like a sentence or 2 or whatever it's called. And I said, in your reports, you write about strongholds, Hezbollah strongholds, and they say, oh, both of them said this. That no, I didn't do this, and my editor did this. I said, doesn't make a difference. It's in your name. You did not tweet about it. You did not say that these are civilians. Why? Because they want their paycheck, but they're working for the Epstein class. So when the Western media, when the Washington Post, when we were on our way to Islamabad to negotiate, and I was on the plane, the Washington Post published a piece calling for the assassination of the Iranian negotiators. This is where the United States is today. So the U.S. government is a rogue regime that launches wars, that kidnaps presidents, that strangles nations like Cuba right now as we speak. And when the Secretary of State says that the great era of empire was fantastic, and since the Second World War, decolonization has been a bad thing, and we have to revive this. He said this in Davos, and then all those European seals were clapping for him, just like the U.S. congressmen and women and senators would clap for Netanyahu. This is the world that we are living in, a world where we all are living in the jungle, and the empire is lashing out at country after country. But in the case of Iran, that was a bridge too far, and the Iranian people are not going to bow. Trump has been used to bullying countries, even big countries like India, and the trade war. He threatened country after country, but Iran is different. Iran is not going to bow down, and come what may, the Trump regime is going to fail, and this is going to be a turning point. And hopefully, after the defeat against Iran, the people of Cuba, Venezuela, and elsewhere can feel more at ease, because this empire is going to go downhill. But the sad thing about it is that the American people, they don't deserve this. No one does. But it's all being done for the sake of Zionism. They don't care about the American people.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Mohammad Marandi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a great pleasure.